Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Ryan Aber, joined by Jason Kersey. Jason, how you doing on this Sunday evening?
Well, I'd be a lot better if the Packers had won, but they didn't, and that's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, it definitely is. It was a rough game for the Packers, a rough finish, but like we were talking about before we got started, it's something we're not going to let ruin our lives for today or certainly any time past that.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, sports are supposed to be fun, and that
At
was
the end of the day, who are you, Josh Heupel?
It's just a nod to Josh Heupel, considering his recent unemployment. No, I mean, but the truth is, I mean, sports are supposed to be fun, and that game was a lot of fun, even if it didn't particularly go the way you and I wanted it to there at the end. But how can you watch that game and not think that sports are great, you know?
Absolutely. That's what they're all about. It was a good ending, not a fun ending for you and I and any other Packers fans out there, but oh well. It's still football. Football's still fantastic, and we'll watch the AFC Championship game here in a little bit, and then we'll watch the Super Bowl here in a couple weeks, and get ready for the official full-time off season of football in both college and the NFL. But
yeah.
Jason, we're here to talk about OU football in particular, and we certainly haven't been hurting for news and activity over the last couple weeks, but finally got a chance to sit down and talk to Lincoln Riley on Saturday afternoon in Norman. And what was your overall impressions of him during his press conference?
Well, I think he's an impressive guy. I don't, he's obviously young, but he's very intelligent. He's thoughtful. So far I like his answers. I like the way that he handled himself in the press conference, and I think that's one of those things that the general public may not care all that much about, but for us, it's always good to have a guy like that. So, I in that regard, I really like him, and also I just think he's a sharp guy. We talk about looking for a guy who can really transform this offense, and I think they may have found a guy. Now, he is young, but he's young, but he's not inexperienced. I think that's the key thing that Bob Stoops tried to make a point of yesterday, and it's right. You can be young and experienced. You don't have to be young and inexperienced. And this is a guy with 5 years of play calling.
Yeah, 5 years of play calling. He's been a full-time coach since he was, 22 years old, when most guys are graduating from college and getting their GA starts in the most ideal sense of the word, and generally it takes a couple years even past that. But this is a guy who went to Texas Tech for a year as a walk-on quarterback, and Mike Leach pulled him aside and said, "Hey, you're not going to play for me, but I think you've got a future in coaching." He's come from a family of coaches. Always knew that he wanted to be a coach, but he said that was a difficult process after a 2-hour meeting to decide if that's what he wanted to do, hang up his cleats and be done playing the game of football. Finally decided that was the best course of action for him, and it certainly turned out very well for Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, it's worked out well for him, and you sort of wonder how many other guys like that there could be if you were to look at the walk-ons at OU, and obviously you and I have gotten to know a bunch of walk-ons this year, but if you look at those guys and maybe that's something that other coaches ought to think about, is saying, hey, you're not going to play here, but we might have something for you if you love football and you want to be around this program. And you just wonder how many other Lincoln Rileys there might be out there that people who don't think about things the way Mike Leach does might not have thought to do something like that,
Yeah, and to me, that's one of my favorite things about Mike Leach. He wasn't a big-time college football player, period, himself, but he certainly thinks about the game in a different way and analyzes things in a different way, not only from other football coaches and other college football coaches, but from other people in general. And I'm sure that helped him get to a point where he could do something like that, pull a kid aside and say, hey, let's think about this and what would be the best course of action for you.
Well, and Mike Leach also, I think, understands differently that, Mike Leach didn't play college football. So maybe for him, it's not as big a deal if you don't have that experience. Whereas maybe for a guy who did play big-time college football and is a head coach, maybe they think about those things a little differently. And if in the background you can hear what sounds like a dog running around, it's because we are sitting on my back porch, or my back deck in Norman, and my dog Buster is out here with us, and he really wants to play fetch. So we're trying to do that and podcast. So
yeah, but we hope the sound is all right. But Jason, a couple really interesting points to me in the Lincoln Riley press conference started before Lincoln Riley said anything, and that was Bob Stoops, one, saying that he wanted to get back to the Mike Leach, Hal Mumme air raid offense, and then two, saying that Lincoln Riley's track record speaks to being able to integrate running backs into that offense, which had been a concern for some OU fans, at least, when they heard about going back to this offense, that guys like Samaje Perine would get left behind in the dust.
Yeah, and that's something that I thought was interesting too, because when you look at Lincoln Riley's track record, he has had 1,000-yard rushers since he's become an offensive coordinator. People hear the air raid and they hear Mike Leach and they think, oh man, well, where do the running backs fit in? Well, the running backs fit in pretty well with him when they have a guy who can, and I think Samaje Perine obviously has to be a factor. I mean, if he wasn't a factor, that would just be ridiculous. But then also I think you look at a guy like Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon coming off of his suspension is a guy that everybody talked about being special in terms of his talent, but especially his pass catching ability out of the backfield. He was the number 1 or number 2 all-purpose back in the country according to Rivals. So this is a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield, and a guy like that I think might have a really good place in the Lincoln Riley offense.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it'll be interesting to me once we get into spring football and start to see these guys, how things fit in and what that offense looks like. And obviously, a lot of times during spring football, you're not going to see the same offense you're going to see once the season starts. We saw that a couple years ago when they went to the zone read attack. Some of the differences there, but this is a team with a lot of questions outside of the running back spot, and the sooner we can start to see some answers come into focus, I think the better for all parties.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I think, and I think a lot of things too are going to maybe depend on what kind of a receivers coach they bring in. They've really been pretty hush-hush about that, and I assume that if they're going to go get a Mike Leach, Hal Mumme guy for the offensive coordinator spot, they probably want a guy with some experience in that system for the wide receivers coach as well. But you talking about the air raid stuff, I thought the most interesting thing that got said at the press conference yesterday was that Bob Stoops basically admitting that it was his fault that they'd steered away from that offense, and that that's what they wanted to get back to. And that's interesting to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, he fired a guy who could run that system, but was trying to run a system that he really wasn't that familiar with. So that was sort of weird. And then also that he's sort of continuing this openness and this willingness to admit that he's wrong about things. But it's clear that the days of the zone read are over, in my opinion anyway. I don't see...
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Lincoln Riley reaffirmed that when he was asked about running the quarterback. He says, well, we like to do it from time to time, but it's also much more important to keep our quarterbacks healthy and to let those other skill position guys carry the ball and make things happen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and actually, I'm writing about that. We're recording this on Sunday night. I'm writing about that particular thing, about the quarterback run game and Lincoln Riley for tomorrow's paper. So it is interesting. I mean, Shane Carden, the quarterback who just left East Carolina, had some success running the ball, but they didn't do it a lot. I think they really were selective with it, and I think that, you know, if you're going to run a zone read system like OU wanted to run, you have to do it more often than they did. But if that's not the main part of your offense, you can be a little more selective with it. But the problem the last 2 years was they just didn't know what they wanted. It was like they could never figure out what they wanted to do. And when it's kind of like, you know, you hear people say when you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. Well, when you have 10 offensive systems, you really have 0.
Yeah, and going back to what you just said about when you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. Well, what about
3.
when you have 3 quarterbacks?
Well, I think they're going to get it down to 1. You know,
and it seemed like there was one guy that got talked about a whole lot more yesterday than the other 2.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Baker Mayfield, just because of his experience in the Texas Tech Cliff Kingsbury system, you know, I definitely think he's going to get a good look. I mean, Lincoln Riley said we tried to get him to East Carolina when he decided to leave Texas Tech. So definitely, you know, an interesting thing to watch is going to be who wins that quarterback job, because, you know, in the past, Bob Stoops has had no problem letting quarterback battles run into the fall camp. But this time it's different. You know, I think that he might do that again, but, you know, with Trevor Knight having all the experience he has, if he has a really good spring, I would think they'd just come out and say he's going to be the guy. But if he doesn't have a good spring, I think that, or if he has an okay spring, but so does Baker Mayfield, I think this all bodes well for Baker Mayfield, or even Justice Hansen or Cody Thomas.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, Trevor Knight has to have a fantastic spring in order to hold on to the hope of being OU's starting quarterback in the fall.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
And Jason, from here, the focus turns to the 2 biggest things, and probably the 2 biggest reasons Josh Heupel was fired: recruiting solid quarterbacks and recruiting period for the offensive side, and developing those quarterbacks. What do you get a sense of from talking to Lincoln Riley, from talking to people who know and have worked with Lincoln Riley, how he's going to do as far as developing guys and bringing them in?
Well, you know, one thing I think that it's important to remember about Lincoln Riley is that Shane Carden really did develop well. You know, I think you know, I saw that he was the, you know, one of the, I think 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that, ranked quarterback in the draft, I think, according to Mel Kiper. So, and you know, a lot of quarterbacks generally get drafted. So I think there's a good chance he'll get drafted. And when you can get a guy drafted out of East Carolina, I think that really says something good about what you're doing. So, you know, he does have experience with that. I think it'll be good for these guys, all of them. Trevor Knight especially. I mean, he's had one coach. This will be his 4th season. So I think it'll be good for him to maybe get fresh eyes on what he's doing. And with Josh Heupel, his quarterback development was phenomenal until he became the offensive coordinator. And we've talked about this a million times, but you can see when Landry Jones' development stopped, and it's the year that Josh Heupel became the offensive coordinator. I guess I only say that to say that Josh Heupel is still a really good quarterbacks coach, and I think that he's going to land on his feet probably at some point and get a pretty good job, and may eventually rise back up into being a coordinator again. But yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like Lincoln Riley can develop quarterbacks and handle the play calling responsibilities at the same time. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and it's not just quarterbacks, though. Recruiting going on right now. The dead period opened up late last week. Coaches got back out on the road recruiting. Had a big weekend with bringing guys in for visits, especially with Bedlam basketball going in. Had a strong a group of guys out there. Lincoln Riley was out there as coaches. Samaje P. Ryan was out there with the recruits and everything. But this recruiting weekend's already paid off a little bit with 3-star commit Antoine Stevens from Dallas Kimball committed on Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, I guess, early Sunday afternoon to OU. What do you think about Stevens and the direction that OU recruiting is heading in general, even being a couple coaches down right now?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the thing. You know, Antoine Stevens, I frankly don't know a ton about him. I know that he's a cornerback. I know that, you know, he's had a few other offers. I don't think he was a guy who was extremely heavily recruited by some of the other programs that maybe OU generally recruits against, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah.
Neither was Jordan Thomas. So, you know, neither was Zach Sanchez, frankly, for a lot of guys. So, with a lot of teams. So, you know, I think it's obvious that they need help in the defensive backfield, and that's kind of a focus for them right now. I think it has to be. So, I mean, that's sort of my initial takeaway. And just from what we've seen the last couple of years, Stan Von Taylor, Dakota Austin, Jordan Thomas, they're not scared to play true freshman cornerbacks if they think that they can play. So I think that a lot of cornerbacks may look and say, hey, I might have a shot to play here. I think it's pretty obvious that the starters going into next year are going to be Sanchez and Thomas. But to me, I think that's a pretty good selling point for them. You know, I know they had a lot of other guys in. They didn't, at least as of this recording, they didn't have any other commits off the weekend. But it seems like it was a good weekend for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was some thought that Darrell Patterson from Lawton might commit. Hasn't happened as yet, which would give him an even bigger boost back there. But you talked about recruiting in the secondary, and obviously a big focus. Well, it certainly shows when you look around there, you know, what 20-person or 19, 20, I guess, with the addition of Stevens' commitment list, that or 19, I guess. I think Marquise Overton from Jigs has been taken off. It's become clear that he's not going to make not going to qualify. But you've got cornerbacks, William Johnson, a junior college guy that they really like. That's a sort of a late bloomer type of a kid who's already on campus. Then you've got a couple, Antoine Stevens that we talked about, the cornerback, and PJ Mbonassor is the biggest, probably the highest touted of those cornerback groups, and continues a string of fantastic names coming out of Pflugerville, Hendrickson.
Yeah.
And Pflugerville's a heck of a name in and of itself.
It's a cool name for a city. It's awesome.
Yeah,
I'd love to go down there and write a story just so I can have that date line. Pflugerville, Texas.
You need to get on that. I wish we would have stopped in there on our whirlwind trip to Austin.
I don't think you had time
last week, but no, we definitely did not have time. Had time to go down there, watch a basketball game, and head right back. But it's not just the corner. Safeties have been a big focus as well, and they've got a few commitments back there. Khalil Houghton from Waco Midway, a 3-star guy who'd been heavily recruited elsewhere. And then, of course, Will Sunderland from Midwest City, who's a 4-star guy who's been on everybody's radar.
Sure.
And OU beat out Ohio State from him, which certainly says a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another deal that maybe Will Sunderland sort of sees the opportunity back there. I mean, I think we all can agree Stephen Parker showed flashes, and we think he's going to be really good. Ahmad Thomas, I don't know if the fact that he started all 13 games is more of a sign that they really think that he's going to be good and they have a lot of faith in him and he's showing them a lot of things in practice, or it's the fact that they didn't have anything else.
Yeah,
I have no idea which one that is.
I'd sort of lean toward the latter on that, just because, I mean, we saw guys that had played in the past not get a chance to play much this year.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly they've gone away from guys, and not just at the safety spot, but in the secondary in general. They've had plenty of guys who have played and started games that we didn't see any of. I mean, Cortez Johnson is a guy who started a couple games last year, completely disappeared.
Yep.
Stan Von Taylor started a game last year. Didn't see a whole lot of him this season. I think
Dakota Austin.
Dakota Austin is a guy I think you thought he was going to be a starter.
I know.
A lot of us thought he was going to contribute a ton, and we didn't see any of him either. So certainly there's going to be opportunities for all of these DBs, especially the safeties, to play pretty quickly, and they're going to need to, because I think you can say it's his brother and all that, but I don't think if Mike Stoops wasn't doing the strong job recruiting that he's doing, that he would certainly be in a much more tenuous spot.
Yeah, I think so too. And I also think, obviously, being Bob's brother is a factor. Would he have been fired this year if he wasn't Bob's brother? I think that's the million-dollar question. And I think that that's a question that Bob will never answer, and I think it's a question that most people at OU will never answer.
Yeah, and I don't know that Bob could answer it in
Yeah.
any kind of truthful manner.
Yeah, well, and if the fact that you are keeping him, why would you answer that question?
Yeah.
You know, he's going to be on your staff. Why would you say that and make him mad or make him upset? So, but I also do say that the OU defense was much better. You know, in 2013, they were a good defense that year for the most part, and I think that they suffered because of youth in the secondary. I do think that if it came down to it, Bob Stoops would either let Mike go, or he would could very forcefully tell him, I think you need to go find something else, or try to call his buddies and his connections around the country and help him find something else, because I just don't think that that Bob Stoops is. I think that he's at the point in his career now where he wants to win, and I don't think that he wants his legacy to go down as being one that tailed off at the end. And you know what I mean. I think that it's important. I think the OU football program is important enough to him to where he will make the right decisions, and that doesn't. I mean, shoot. Firing Jay Norvell and Josh Heupel, I think, killed him. I really do. It sounded like it did. He said he had sleepless nights and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and especially Josh for everything that he's
Sure.
done for this program, and as a coach and a player, been here for so long, that had to eat him up.
yeah, I mean, heck yeah. I couldn't believe it happened, frankly. And the fact that it did happen, I think, says that Mike is not immune to anything. Now, obviously, there's a difference between your brother and a good friend / former player. But I don't know that the difference is quite as big as people think it is when you're thinking about making a decision like that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it is, and I think it's interesting to me to see and hear the difference in Bob Stoops from even. Now, I wasn't at the bowl, but it seems like from post bowl and certainly post Bedlam to now, there's certainly a resolve, it seems, to make this thing better and turn this thing around.
Yeah.
And what's gone along with that is the defensiveness and the, I don't know, attitude isn't the right word, but just the demeanor has certainly changed and softened in some ways. You know, he's still going to bring up the Sugar Bowl, which I know everybody sort of scoffs at this point.
Yeah.
But he's not going to do it as much, and he's taken ownership of this thing in a different way. And I know in a lot of ways he had done that privately at least, but publicly had put on another face.
Yeah.
But we've certainly seen a different Bob Stoops over the last couple weeks that we've talked to him than we did during the end of the season as things were going south.
I think he had to do that too. I mean,
Yeah.
whether that's him being more showing his real personality more, or whether that's him doing what he thinks he has to do for publicity purposes, I don't know. But either way, I think it's important, and the fans need to hear him, say those things. I would lean more towards he's not just doing it for publicity or to make things better. I think that's part of it, but I think that he's showing us a little bit more of how he really feels. I mean, I can remember being in the room in the postseason little presser after the Cotton Bowl with Johnny Manziel, and that was far different than what he was like the other day. Not with Lincoln Riley's presser, but the one where he announced about Josh and Jay. So I definitely think that there is he's realized the importance of that, and because when things are going well and you're winning a lot, it's a lot easier to get away with acting like that in press conferences. But when you're not doing well, it's tougher, particularly when you're a guy like him. I think that if things go south for the Thunder, Russell Westbrook's going to find out that you can't act like that in press conferences or with the media. But he did it after a huge game. So sorry, the neighborhood dogs are barking. Buster's inside now, but maybe they're trying to get him to come back out.
Yeah, maybe so. They need some playmates. But Jason, another interesting development over the last few days with a guy we've mentioned on this podcast a couple times today is Jay Norvell. Jay Norvell was fired as Oklahoma's wide receivers coach, but recently had an interesting landing spot.
Yeah, we'd heard that he was interviewing at Texas, and he's now the Texas wide receivers coach, which, man, that is incredible. That is not what I expected. I thought he was going to go to Wisconsin, and I don't know whether he was offered the job at Wisconsin or not. Because I sort of feel like if he was offered the job at Wisconsin, he would have taken it, because that's where he's from. He's tried to get there before.
Yeah, but I also wonder if it might have been a point of pride thing to say.
Yeah.
Sort of prove.
Well, I threw this out on Twitter the other day, and what's going to happen if next October, the Texas wide receivers torch the OU secondary? I got some interesting responses, but a lot of the response was, well, they'd be like every other team that plays OU. Well, we'll see about that this year. I don't know how good they're going to be, but Texas has some talent. He's going to go down there and coach, at least one guy I know he recruited pretty heavily, Armani Foreman. So that's going to be interesting. But the question is he going to be able to develop those receivers? And I don't know. I think that he can. I think he's a good coach, but that was his problem. Now, what I will say, though, is I would not be shocked if Texas starts beating OU for a lot of the receivers they want.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's no doubt he's been proven to recruit. The question is, can he develop once those guys get around?
And now with Jay, a lot of the receivers he was recruiting were from out in California. So is he going to start going out there now?
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Strong has certainly shown no allegiance to Texas high school kids.
Right. So now is Jay Norvell going to be able to go into California, into places that might have had relationships with OU, and beat them for some kids? So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to follow that. But on a personal note, and we've talked about this a million times, but I'm happy for Jay because he's a good guy, and you hate to see somebody who's that good as of a person lose their job. But you knew he was probably going to land somewhere and be all right, and he is. So good for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of following that tangent a little bit, what do you think about Texas's recruiting and what they've done and going after mainly Florida kids, but Texas for years, especially under Mac Brown, has just been Texas as far as getting high school kids, and now they're going away from that in a different way, and I wonder how that's going to set with some of the high school powers in Texas, the coaches especially, when they do that and either overlook or just don't have spots for even big time prospects in that state.
Yeah, man, it's tough because all of Charlie Strong's connections with high school coaches and his recruiting history, is down in that part of the country, in Florida and all that. But he, I don't know. He's got to realize where his bread is buttered, and I think that maybe that'll come back to bite him. At this point, they've got a good recruiting class, and maybe as he's at UT longer, he'll establish more of those relationships. I'm sure he will, but I also think that he's maybe from a practical standpoint, he's thinking, okay, now it's harder for me to just dominate in Texas the way I used to, or the way Texas used to dominate in that state. I mean, Kevin Sumlin is doing big things at Texas A&M, at least in terms of recruiting. Art Briles has Baylor up and going. Cliff Kingsbury has been able to recruit, better than I think a lot of people would have thought. Although he seems to be losing some commitments as well. But and then you've obviously got OU and Oklahoma State, a program that is shown that they can go into Texas and recruit well. So, he needs to probably do better in Texas, but at the same time, I think it's sort of a practical thing that it's just not as easy for Texas as it used to be.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at the rivals' team rankings for recruiting as they stand now, and obviously a lot can change between now and signing day in a couple weeks, February 4th. But you've got Alabama at the top, and it seems like they're always at the top.
Yeah,
but
just put them up there every year.
Yeah, you look down and Florida State, USC, Clemson is interesting at 4.
Yeah,
obviously Brent Venables has been a big part of that on the defensive side, but you go down a couple ticks and you get to Texas A&M at 9. They've got 23 commits right now, 1 5-star kid, a lot of 4s and 3s, but Texas a couple spots beyond them at 12, and then OU at 14. So everything really bunched up. The surprising one to me is when you look at the Big 12 order on this. TCU comes in at 24th. They really haven't been a traditionally strong recruiting team.
I didn't even mention them.
They've done a fantastic job of developing guys, and obviously they're strong on the defensive side, but certainly what they've done offensively this year has opened some eyes of some recruits. But then West Virginia at 26, and then it takes you a long time to get to Baylor and Oklahoma State. I mean, Texas Tech is at 43, Baylor's at 47, Kansas is ahead of Oklahoma State. Certainly Oklahoma State's future is bright, but they've got some ground to make up recruiting-wise, especially they've got to get a running back in for this class.
Yeah.
I know we're sort of going off in a tangent, but I know somebody talked to us about this a couple days ago and said, you should just follow these lines of trains of thought when they come up, so we're going to do it. But it's interesting looking at those rankings and seeing where things stand.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. Another thing about Oklahoma State, I guess, that we get so caught up in the recruiting rankings, and they're important, I think, and obviously the guys at Rivals have dedicated their lives to this, so this is what they do. But there's also something to be said for the fact that a lot of times when a kid commits to OU or a school like OU, their ranking tends to bump up. Dalton Wood's a great example. This is an unranked by every major recruiting service, and then he commits to OU, and he's a 3-star prospect across the board, pretty much. Trying to think of other guys. I mean, at the beginning of this recruiting, or a couple of these guys, and I can't think of who they were. Maybe Kenneth Mann. He's the one that's still committed, right? Tyrell Jacobs decommitted.
Correct.
Kenneth Mann, when he committed, he was a 2-star guy. Now he's a 3-star guy. And there were other ones. Last year, Dwayne Orso was one who bumped up because he committed after he committed.
Will Johnson was either a 2-star or an unranked guy. And he's now a 3-star guy.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there is something to be said for that. And maybe a team like Baylor doesn't get the credit when they get a commit. You know what I mean? From an unknown guy. So and maybe that'll change, because the thing is, you can't look at what happened in Norman this year between Baylor and OU, and OU's had a better recruiting ranking every year than Baylor, but you can't look at that and say, wow, OU was more talented. I mean, there's, maybe they've done a better job developing some of that, but they were definitely talented in terms of being on the field with OU.
Yeah, absolutely, and again, it all goes back to development that we've talked about is the reason that Josh Heupel no longer has a job, the reason that Jay Norvell is no longer here, the reason that some of these changes have taken place, and the reason that OU has frankly fallen behind Baylor and TCU is because of the development of these guys. So that's going to be the most important thing moving forward is, the guys that they bring in, how they're able to fit into the system, and how they're able to progress year to year.
Yeah.
But, Jason, that's all the time we have for today. It's getting awfully chilly out here, so we're going to go in and warm up a little bit. But we'll be back next week for another episode of the Nonfiction Writers. Until then, you can check our stuff out every day at newsok.com and every morning in the Oklahoman for the best OU coverage anywhere.